Hello, listener. So, you like scary movies? Well, it is a creepy night, and with all those crazy lunatics out there, well, you really shouldn't be alone. Ooh, you look so freaked out right now. Now I suggest you listen very carefully. Subscribe to Class Horrorcast, or I'll gut you like a fish. Enjoy the show. I'll be watching.
Mark Ramsey is an audio storytelling mastermind and builder of new audio worlds. Some of his work includes horror hits Inside Jaws, Psycho and The Exorcist, which breathes new life into old stories and makes them smart and terrifying, with audiences left clawing for more. Listen in to hear about his creation of Brad the Impaler and Movies That Suck, what he feels makes a good podcast, success being a journey not a destination, and much, much more. Up next is my incredible conversation with Mark Ramsey. Can you remember your first horror movie you've ever seen, or your first horror experience?
Wow, my first horror movie. You know what? When I was a kid, it was probably those late night, hosted shows on Saturday night. I think where I grew up in upstate New York, it was called Frightening Flickers. Mm-hmm. And there was some invisible ghost or something hosting Gregory the Gravewalker. That's what it was called, which is a great name, by the way. Gregory the Gravewalker. I'll have to keep that in mind because I'm sure it's available. I was a kid, and all the old Universal movies would run late at night. On Halloween, they'd run all night. And I'd have friends over, we'd do a sleepover or whatever. 11 o'clock, midnight, whatever the time was, the Universal movie would start. I didn't know the difference between, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman and the original Frankenstein. It was only later that I realized there was a distinct qualitative difference between those two. But that's kind of the beginning, and I just love the black and white. I love the whole thing. And also, I think, and this is something that just occurred to me really, but it's for a lot of people, and certainly for me, it's a thing I share with my dad, who's been gone for a while now. When I was a kid, maybe, 10, 12 years old, I remember those were days when, to see the movie that wasn't new, good luck. There was no VHS, there was no DVD, there was no stream. So I remember we went to the local town hall where they were having a special showing of, that was Pit and the Pendulum. And the room was full. The room was full in those days for movies which were not only not first run, but, kids that were generally too young to see them anyway. And I remember sitting there next to my dad, and there's that last scene in Pit and the Pendulum when I can't remember the actor, John, whatever his name is, says, "No one will ever come into this place again." And he closes the door, and cut to Barbara Steele with her eyes staring out from, what do you call it? The thing that she's in with the spikes in it. And I remember, and then the music goes, mm-hmm. Everybody knows the scene, right?
Yeah.
And I remember just shaking in my chair and my dad put his arm around me and said, "It's only a movie." And that's the kind of thing that stays with you forever.
And would you say that that I guess increased your love to maybe replicate that feeling, or did you kind of stray away from those kinds of movies?
Oh no, I mean, who doesn't like to tremble in front of his screen? Mm-hmm. I loved it. I kept going back for more. The fact that it was scary didn't deter me at all. It was an attraction. I mean, we all know the attraction of these movies, that they're people in danger. They're people who are outsiders. Monsters are outsiders. Monsters are us. Mm-hmm. And what's not to, what a great way to kind of empathize with that. There's no real difference between the Frankenstein monster and E.T. other than, 60, 70 years. So I think for me, it was a great introduction. And also, I think it was a reflection of just how, feeling something at the movies, whether you're feeling happy, sad, scared, angry, whatever you're feeling, that's kind of the purpose of that entertainment. It's to evoke something in you. When we did these podcasts, our primary purpose, my primary purpose, was to make people feel something, whatever it might be. And it wasn't always scared. But we recognized, or at least I recognized, that there was a unique capability. Somebody asked me yesterday, we were talking to some people about some projects that we're pitching that we're looking for funding for that are in the horror genre. And he said, why you guys? And I said, well, because for one thing, we understand that audio has this unique and special ability to scare people that film doesn't have, that the video doesn't have, the text certainly doesn't have, but audio has it because you can't see what's happening. And that's why when you turn the sound down on any horror movie, it becomes infinitely less scary.
Yeah.
If not downright laughable. I mean, I suspect that if you turn down the sound at the movie Halloween, it's utterly ridiculous.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, and it's something I think that's, maybe for the general audience, they don't actually realize the power of that.
Well, and that was, not only do they not realize the power of it, but the people doing scary audio don't realize the power of it. Mm-hmm. That's a whole other thing. We were very deliberate in everything we did. Very, very deliberate in terms of how we structured certain things to create certain effects. I mean, my production partner is an amazing sound designer. He is just the guy. And he and I worked together on the inside stuff. And since that time, he's done most of the work for Wondery. That's notable. He did Dirty John. He did Dr. Death. He did all the big Wondery series. But his foot in the door was the inside stuff. And what we did there, especially I would say with Inside the Exorcist, which I know is his sentimental favorite because of the very specific nature of the sound design. But we did some great things there. And we did great things with the idea that, with the intention to scare people. That was the goal. Mm-hmm. The goal was not to just tell a story. The goal was, with various aspects of that project and Inside Psycho, the first project, was to scare people. And I would not have viewed it as successful unless we had done that. And also, I'm very into endings. And I wanted to make sure the ending was really fulfilling. Mm-hmm. And Psycho was a little bit experimental, the way we did that one. But that was also the first one out. Exorcist was the second. And the way we wrapped that one up was very intentional. And it's the main reason why a lot of people who've written me about that and written in the media about it say it's the scariest thing they've ever heard. It's because of the ending of that series.
Mm-hmm. And I guess growing up then, was your intention always to be involved in something like this, or did you have different ideas?
Well, let's see. The first thing I ever wanted to be was an actor, and I was a kid, probably in third grade. And I remember I said that, when they go around the class, they say, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Mm-hmm. Fireman, doctor, police officer, actor. And the kid in front of me, turned back to me and said, "You're going to starve." So that was the moment where I decided maybe something else would be a good idea. For better or worse. So, interestingly, through the years, I was able to keep my hand in some interesting ways. When I was in high school later, of course, high school and theater is a big part of high school for anybody who's into that. And it really allowed me to come out of my shell because I'm, like a lot of people, very inner-directed, shy person. And participating in plays, musicals, drama, etc., was really a kind of a way that allowed me to kind of realize things I didn't know I had in me. and it haloed over every other aspect of my life at that time. And, you're just finding out who you are when you're 16 years old. So it was really influential for me. And there was one time where the students, I went to high school in Rochester, New York, and which is one of the homes of Shirley Jackson. And Shirley actually went to my high school.
Oh, wow.
Shirley, the author of, The Lottery and all that, the other House on Haunted. Isn't that what it's called, House on Haunted Hill? No, that's it's a Price thing. Haunting of Hill House.
Yeah.
So Shirley went to my high school. So Shirley's kind of a local legend. And we had an opportunity to do student-directed one-act plays. So the one I picked was an adaptation of Shirley Jackson's The Lottery, which is, kind of only tangentially horror. But one of the great things about horror is that almost everything, it turns out, is tangentially horror if you look deep enough. So that story and the one act itself, the adaptation I remember was fairly unremarkable. But it's not a story that really lends itself to thoughtful adaptation. It's kind of all about the way it finishes. And I guess it's not wrong to give away the ending. But the story is, and this is me going off memory now, but the story is a bunch of people in a small town who gather together one day for a lottery, and everyone, participates in the lottery. And the winner of the lottery ends up getting stoned to death by everyone else in town. That's what happens when you win. And I thought it was a chance to do some really cool things. It has a really large cast, for one thing, of people who have almost nothing to do. And the most important role is the person who gets stoned to death at the end. And I remember I was also at that time, I did, early foray into audio and radio. I did the announcements for the high school in the morning. And sometimes you would hear people respond to the things you'd say over the loudspeaker in their homerooms every day. And I remember that day when we were promoting that show, the announcement was, hey, tonight or this afternoon, performance of The Lottery in wherever it was, everybody come watch Lisa Krieger get stoned. And you could hear... You could hear the laughs ring out from across the high school, right? Which, by the way, is addictive. Response is addictive. When you hear people respond, it's really something that gets under your skin, whether it's applause, whether it's laughing, whether it's fear, whatever it is. And that's the main reason why anybody does any of this stuff, is for the response. So, everybody come watch Lisa Krieger get stoned, or even remember her name. And I almost said gimmick, but that would be too William Castle. So the special features of the show, I opened with this, this, I don't remember what all the technical lights were called, the theater lights, but it was just this light with this colored gel on it, illuminating the stage. And we opened actually before the show. A few of the cast members and I climbed aboard the stage with rocks. We had bags of actual rocks, stones, and we littered them across the stage. Now, this is supposed to be done in mime, right? So there was an interesting titter in the audience when, before the show starts, because they all know how it ends, we start lining the stage with actual stones. So when the conclusion, the climax of the one act arrives, and everyone wanders around the stage, it's kind of it's not very well illustrated in the action in the one act, what you do here. We know that the story ends with the character getting stoned to death. What we don't, but that's kind of bland on the stage. You have to do something. So I had everyone chant something, and I can't remember what it was, but I had everyone chant something, but I had them chant it at their own pace. They didn't do it in unison.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden, you know, and of course I cast this role. Lisa was superb. I cast this role with a screamer in mind. So Lisa starts panicking. She starts screaming. She starts freaking out. I mean, she was perfectly cast. And I've got people milling around the stage, starting this chant, picking up rocks as they go. And the lights cut to that backlight with the gel, you know, which I had foreshadowed at the beginning. Mm-hmm. I'm laughing at my cleverness as a 17-year-old. And people are milling about. So now the room is dark except for this backlight. And so then they raise their hands. They surround Lisa. They raise their hands. She's in the center. The backlight's behind her head, shining out towards the audience, right? They raise their hands with the rocks in their hand. And she screams. The light cuts to black, and they throw the rock down on the ground at their feet. And then there's silence for like 30 seconds before people start moving off the stage. There wasn't applause. There wasn't laughter. There wasn't anything. People were just, you know, as aghast as you can be at 17. Mm-hmm. And that was a moment where, again, you say, this is what you can do if you do it right. You can influence people this way. Isn't that fabulous?
Mm-hmm. Even listening to you tell that story kind of shows that you had a flair for it even back then.
Well, you know, I don't like to use that term or a talent for it or a skill for it. You just have to try hard. You know, you have to know where you want to go, and you have to say, I'm going to try hard, and I'm going to make decisions that are intended to achieve that outcome. And you have to always remember that what you don't show people, what you don't do, what you don't play, what you don't share is just as important as what you do. If anybody ever learned a lesson from the movie Jaws, it should be that more shark would have ruined that movie. That the fact that the shark wasn't working is exactly why the movie was. And that's true in everything. That's why if you look at, you know, some of the modern horror that's intended to actually scare people, I think a lot of modern horror isn't intended to scare people at all. It's just intended to, you know, kind of entertain people. Mm-hmm. But if you really want to scare people and you look at some of the, you know, Warner Media stuff, Annabelle, Conjuring universe type stuff where there is a conscious intention, Invisible Man. Mm-hmm. Boy, talk about not showing something.
Yeah, yeah.
Invisible Man has been remade a bunch of times, but this is the first time it's been remade scary. And that's a testament not to the nature of the material, but to the intention of the person who made it that way. Mm-hmm. And you have to want to make it that way. And that means holding back. That means moments of silence. That means times where you just let things drag. It's like sometimes I hear people complain about some of the classic horror movies from 70s primarily, that they're too slow or that the buildup is too slow. They have this awful, inconvenient thing called a first act. You know? It's okay for the buildup to be slow. It creates classic moments. I mean, the buildup, well, obviously Jaws begins with a bang, and then there's a fairly long buildup. And that's really important. So the slow moments that exist are important to accentuate the moments that are sharp, that are profound, that are stark, that are impactful, that are sudden. You know, not everything is a jump scare rather. Not everything is a jump scare. Not every jump scare is earned. Most jump scares are not earned. And I'm not really a fan of jump scares. I prefer, again, if you look at Haunting of Hill House, perfect example. There's stuff going on the screen. I mean, I remember stopping at one point saying to my wife, look at what's in the background of this scene. And there's no audio cue. You know, there's a scary creature in the background of the scary ghost in the background of the scene. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah. There's no audio cue. There's no visual cue. There's no, you know, zoom. There's no arrow on the screen. There's no different lighting. It's just there. And if you see it, it's going to scare you. And if you don't see it, you're going to miss it. And that's craft. That's craft. And you know, craft is something that we're not born with. I think craft is something we have to seek out. We have to know it when we see it. And then we have to care enough to seek it out. And that's going to mean some people say, well, your movie's not scary. You know, the old horror movies don't necessarily, even The Exorcist, you know, I think primarily because people have seen it so many times, but it doesn't scare the way it used to scare, right? And, but it's built the way it needs to be built. I mean, the amount of time it takes for that to get going, gosh, just the opening scene in the desert. I mean, that's visually painful for a modern viewer, right?
Yeah.
But there it is.
And it's one of those things I wonder, it's like, and I don't want to blame, I guess, something like social media or anything like that, but there is a sense of instant gratification. And I had only spoke with somebody recently about, you know, the experience of going to the video store and you would spend some time. It was like a library in a way, I guess. And then you would choose a movie or multiple movies. And I can never remember not seeing the entire movie through, even if I didn't necessarily love it. And nowadays, I think it's become so easy to
graze.
Yeah, and like everything is at your fingertips, and you can just watch 5 minutes and decide, you know what? No, this is not for me. It's too slow. It's this, it's that, and just kind of.
Well, when we did Inside Jaws, I had this thematic thread running throughout. You know, it's primarily a story of Steven Spielberg, is what it is, during and after and before the making of Jaws. And I had this thread running throughout of what he went through as a kid, the fact that he was, you know, teased, made fun of, felt outside, all the things that happen when you're a Jewish kid in Phoenix in those days. And one of the devices that I used was a letter that his mother wrote to him, gave to him when he was leaving town to go out west for the first time. And there were several points during the series where I alluded to or made reference to, he took out the letter and he read it again. He held the letter close, whatever references I made throughout the 6 or 7 episodes of the series. And he never read, I never read out loud the letter until the end. And I remember one of the comments that someone gave me was, "What's in this letter?" He keeps referring to this letter. What's in this letter? And to your point, this is someone who simply needed to get through the series.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't do a series with 7 episodes so that you can listen to one and make your judgments on the other 6. You know, you don't watch the first 15 minutes of a movie and say, well, okay, a thriller, and say, okay, well, who did it already?
Yeah, that's true. Actually, I never thought about it like that.
Who did it? Why don't I know in the first 15 minutes who did it to this 2-hour movie? And the thing about that particular device was, you know, there was no letter. I made up that letter, but I made up that letter for a reason, because when he reads the letter, it was at what was portrayed as a low point in his life where he needed to have a jolt of confidence. And it was at that moment where he shared that letter with the audience, who got to understand why that moment was so important, why that letter was so important, and why his journey was so important. Mm-hmm. And that gave greater satisfaction to the actual conclusion of Inside Jaws, which was not scary at all. It was, if anything, a feel-good moment. Mm-hmm. It was very Spielbergian, and quite intentionally so. But you had to wait to get it.
Yeah.
And if you don't wait to get it, don't blame me for not getting it. So to your point, yeah. I mean, that doesn't mean you have to watch every movie, no matter how bad it is. There's plenty of movies that, they say that, I guess, on Netflix, if you don't watch the first, you have to get through 3 episodes of something to be hooked on it. Mm-hmm. 2 to 3 episodes. If you see just 1 episode, it's not enough. Mm-hmm. So I understand, but if you don't like something after the first episode, that's fine. But don't, say, I want to know who committed the crime that's 6 episodes from now.
Yeah, and that's something I always try and tell people as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be the fault of the creator or director or whoever is involved. A lot of these things are subjective as well. Now, while I understand quality content is quality content, some people may just like your standard cheesy slasher movie and might like something a little bit higher brow. Some other people don't. That's
fine. There's room for all that, right? And I Rebecca McHenry once said to me, I never criticize a horror movie because no matter how bad it is, it's somebody's favorite. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. Okay, fair enough. But that doesn't mean it's not bad. That just means it's somebody's favorite.
That's true.
And I like to say that there's a difference. I'm stealing this from my friend, the amazing writer and author Brian McDonald. And he says there's a difference between taste and quality. And if you're you can judge the quality of something, but, if it's not your taste, then your note is meaningless, if you're going to give me notes. You have to differentiate between the two. Just because it's not for you doesn't mean it's bad. It means it's not for you, right? So there is a difference between quality and taste, and we can always aspire for more quality. And sometimes, let's face it, not everybody wants quality all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes people go out of their way. And in fact, you can have a lot of fun with that. There was another thing that I did that was in genre a few years ago. I was living in San Diego, and there was the local newspaper was launching a TV channel. This was, not on cable. This is when those things still mattered more than they do now. Which was only 3 or 4 years ago. And they needed content. Now, there was the newspaper, so they had lots of news content. They were going to do local news all day long, et cetera. So I went to them. I was doing some work with them on something else, and I went to them and I said, what about a late night show? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, like back in the day, horror hosted public domain movies, Elvira, Joe Bob, that stuff. What about something like that? But done in a contemporary, with a contemporary feel. Well, like what? And I said, let me prepare a pitch for you. And I did. So I created this, and it was intentionally satirical, I should say. I created this thing built around this very lame character called Brad the Impaler.
Nice. And
it was called Movies That Suck with Brad the Impaler. That was the title of the show, Movies That Suck. And it was intended to be filmed from the basement of the Union Tribune, which, I had obviously a stock photo of a dungeon behind me. That was the set, a stock photo of a dungeon. And my costume consisted of basically a regular gray shirt and jeans and a cape.
Nice.
Just a cape, right? So, and by the way, if you Google hard enough, you can find this on YouTube now. You can find some of the promos and so on from Movies That Suck, featuring Brad the Impaler right now. And it's funny because the guy who ran the channel said, okay, so where do we get the movies? Well, there's places that sell all these, the public domain horror movies. And by the way, there's a lot of, good public domain horror movies as well as a lot of bad ones. There's a lot, House on Haunted Hill, I guess, is one. Getting back to that again, I can't get away from House on Haunted Hill. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of them. And they're all available for next to nothing. So the question was, well, what would the show be? And I said, well, why don't we, excuse me for a second, I got to get a drink. It's a lot of talking for me at this hour. So I said, why don't we do segments? We'll do an opening segment. We'll do a closing segment. We'll do interstitials. We'll have some stock interstitial, because he said, okay, we need like 24 breaks per movie. And all of a sudden I said, what? Because, this is like, they were breaking for commercials. So 24 breaks a movie. I said, where's the content going to come from with all that? So I said, well, look, let's do this. And we created all these different forms of content. I had an opening, I had a close. I had MST3K style voiceovers for short segments. So I never ripped off MST3K for the whole movie. But we would do 60 to 90 second, some of the breaks would be 60 to 90 second quote unquote highlights where I would talk over it. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying we would do it in one take. I would try and, it was crazy. And we would pre-record those, and we pre-recorded some stock interstitials, things like, why are you still watching this? What's wrong with you? That kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And then we would have a custom opening, and we would have numerous custom segments in the show. And special, features I'd return to. Like I would take the dog for a walk in my neighborhood, and I would see all these people with this crap at the bottom of their driveway with a free sign on it. So I started taking pictures of it, and then we would air the pictures, and we would say, here's a feature called crap for sale in your front yard. Send us your crap for sale in your front yard. So we would just do a riff on there were like the stuff people put in their front yard is unbelievable. There was one car I remember, some kid's car that looked like a Model T. And I thought, who buys a kid's car that looks like a Model T? Unless your parents are Laurel and Hardy. Who does that? So it was a very funny show. Some of the segments were scripted, but even when they were scripted, they were like outlined. They weren't like verbatim scripted. So, mm-hmm. And this was so low tech. I didn't have a teleprompter. I had basically a piece of paper taped to the bottom of the camera.
Wow. With
bullet points on it. And if I was close enough to the camera, I could actually see the bullet points. So we would do things like, if if an assistant or something is one of the engineers, or if a young female engineer or whatever professional or newscaster, whatever, was roaming through the studio, I would bring her on and do a scene with her, just expressing how incredibly awkward Brad the Impaler was around women. So I would there was one I remember, this poor woman. I brought her on, and she was you got to find the right personality for this. But I brought her on, she just stood there, and I stood there, and the camera started. And I would stand there and look at her, look at the camera, and she'd look at me and look at the camera. And we'd just do this for like 30 seconds. And and she turned to me at that point, and with no words spoken, and said, "Are you supposed to be a vampire?" Because I had the cape on.
Yeah.
And I looked at the camera and I said, "Welcome to my life in high school." And that was it. That was the whole segment. So we just did that over and over and over. We had unique segments, and it was fun. It became, here's the funny part of this story. In a building which was, a serious news gathering operation, the local newspaper for San Diego, California. Mm-hmm. Here they had a day's worth of shows. The buzziest, most popular show on the channel was the show that ran overnight that used public domain movies and a goofy guy in a cape. That was the most popular show, the buzziest show on the channel. And I think that's one of the reasons why the show never made it to season 2. because it was embarrassing to the management that the best show they had was the one that, oh, by the way, did I say they were paying nothing for it?
Yeah.
I was doing this for nothing. That was the best show that they had. And of course, everyone who worked on the TV station, it was the show that they were most interested in. They'd see me walking through the halls. It was Brad the Impaler. Hey, I actually, one year, because Comic-Con's in San Diego, I go to Comic-Con. People started recognizing me at Comic-Con who were from San Diego because of Brad the Impaler.
Wow.
That's how funny it was. And it was sad that it couldn't go on. If anything, it reinforced in my mind the value of hosted content. I was not surprised at all when Joe Bob Briggs returned to television on Shudder, mm-hmm. and, quote unquote, broke the internet, even though what he really broke was Shudder's digital platform. I was not surprised at all that it was viewed as successful, because it's the reason why it's worth watching a movie on TCM instead of, streaming it directly, because they have hosts. Hosted content is one of the great lost arts of television. So the fact that Joe Bob brings it back on Shudder doesn't surprise me one bit. And of course, he's also trying to do something erudite with regard to the films, which I wasn't doing at all. I was just there to make fun of the movies and make fun of myself. I was there to entertain. I was song and dance in between the movie. And you watch the movie to get to the break. And that's what you do right now with Joe Bob Briggs on Shudder. You watch the movie more often than not to get to the break. Mm-hmm. And again, it was a great lesson for me.
I feel like there's huge potential for stuff like that, even now, and not necessarily carbon copies of Joe Bob. I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who would like to see just more of the same. But I do think there's a huge opportunity for hosted content like that. Because I was actually going to bring up Joe Bob. He has been, I guess, phenomenal for Shudder in a sense. And I mean, even on this side of the world, so many people, he's kind of brought back that love. And I think people have started to think about, remember the days when. And I just feel like maybe it's a nostalgia thing, but I think that there's huge room and opportunity for other creators, I guess, of that form of content.
I would agree. I think the thing everybody needs to understand is that people who have license to these movies aren't running them because they're viewing them as a low-cost way to monetize. They're not viewing them as a high-cost way to develop, intellectual property. Mm-hmm. That's why Shudder has only one such show. I happen to know because I talked to Shudder early on about Brad the Impaler, interestingly enough. They told me, by the way, they'd never do it. And I said, why not? Because you're making fun of the movies. And I said, well, why are we taking horror movies so seriously? Why are we taking any movies so seriously? Yeah. They're just movies, We can make fun of them. Anyone who takes it that seriously, this is not like the comic store guy from The Simpsons, mm-hmm. Let's have fun with it. But he didn't see it that way. And also, Shudder is, AMC, Shudder is Sundance. He was really the Sundance Shudder guy, and I think he was a lot more Sundance than he was Shudder. So he's no longer there. So who knows? Maybe they have a different attitude now. But what he told me at that time, which was before they hired Joe Bob, but when they were in conversation, was that they were envisioning multiple hosted shows. And they were talking to other potential hosts. None of that stuff materialized, none of it. And I suspect it has to do with the fact that it just costs more than nothing. Because if you're a streaming platform and you have rights to all these movies, you can run them for nothing once you've paid, the license fee. For you to add any expense to that is a risky proposition that someone needs to argue for, someone needs to get someone else to say yes to, and then someone needs to die on their sword for. Mm-hmm. And no one likes to die on their sword in LA.
Yeah, I would imagine.
No one likes to do that. So what's interesting about Joe Bob is when I watched his shows in the old days, just like so many did of a certain age. And my wife, we've been married for over 20 years. So when we first got together, Joe Bob was one of the things that we did together. And since that time, I have gathered from every nook and cranny of the dark web, probably about 100 old Joe Bob, VHS recordings that are digitized and on DVD right now. And they're fascinating, but I've got I may have more than anybody else. That's I've been watching them routinely, over the years I've been watching them. And at one point when my wife and I, before COVID, went through a thing where we try every year to do some fancy exotic vacation, which is why Ireland is on the list. But we would go to Switzerland, or we would go to Amsterdam, or, just once a year trying to India, try and do something special like that. And we'd always bring some of the Joe Bob DVDs. So whenever we did that, I would always take a picture of us watching the DVD on a laptop with, our feet leaning up against the laptop or whatever, and just a picture of the DVD screen with Joe Bob on it. And I would take that picture and I would send it to John Bloom, Joe Bob. And it usually took him a while to get back to me, but we would send him once a year pictures from some, once I said we're in the shadow of the Matterhorn watching Monster Vision. And he would get a kick out of it, because this was in the dark period. Mm-hmm. When Joe Bob, my sense is, I haven't talked to him about this, but my sense is that he has spent 25 years pitching the show, and 25 years being told maybe.
Yeah.
And finally someone says yes, and it changes everything, as it has. So, I'm thrilled for him. I'm glad it's such success for him. He's got a great group of people. He's got a group of people that are very loyal to him and protective of him, mm-hmm. which is what he deserves at this point. So, but yes, to your point, there should be a lot more of it.
Yeah. And
Brad the Impaler is waiting in the wings.
I would love
because
to see that.
Here's the thing. Well, you can find it right now on YouTube.
I've actually got it up in front of me right now.
Do you? You have one of them? Yeah. Isn't that cape great?
That's so good. It's exactly what I pictured as well.
That's right. It's definitely not more than what you picture. That's the intention. It's UTTV, Union Tribune Television, San Diego, Brad the Impaler, Movies That Suck. And look for the promo, because the guys did a promo for the show, which is just outstanding. It's actually high production, which is, out of character. So yes, there should be a lot more like that. But here's the thing. Anything that comes back needs to come back different. Trends in media are like Pet Sematary. Mm-hmm. They don't come back the same way they went, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So it's got to be different. And that's the thing. If Joe Bob has brought back Joe Bob very much the same way, largely because that's what Shudder wanted, I'm told. Because he's happy to do anything that he wants to do that they want him to do. But things don't need, there's no reason why a 65-year-old Elvira needs to be the same as a 35-year-old Elvira. Mm-hmm. And if someone wants to be the new Elvira, that's going to be a whole different entity from the old Elvira. And people need to realize that, that it's an opportunity for experimentation and trying stuff and being brave and being ready for people to say, I don't like that. When we did the Inside series, it was my idea, frankly, to do all the voices myself, storyteller style, not as the characters. And they weren't character voices. Mm-hmm. They were clearly my voice. And Jeff Schmidt, through his, magnificent talent, was able to differentiate the voice in terms of space, time, tone, etc., to make them sound a little bit different without them sounding not like my voice. I wanted it to be my voice. I wanted it to be like a story you tell a child, a bedtime story. Mm-hmm. Not like I'm pretending to be a bunch of actors or pretending to be a bunch of characters. I'm not Jonathan Winters. I'm not, these old school guys who can do that. And that's what we wanted to do. And that ended up becoming the template, interestingly, for lots of the shows that are on Wondery today. Yeah. And if you talk to the people at Wondery, they will tell you that the template for what they call the Wondery sound was really in large part created by Jeff and by me with Inside. Our audio was sent to everybody. Our scripts were sent to everybody. Everybody was, learning from the stuff that we did, which is great. That's why we do it. The fact that other people find value in it is great. I mean, the fact that they did certain things that sounded a lot like what we did, that's a compliment, Mm-hmm. So that's what I mean by saying, you come to it and you make it new, you make it your own. That approach was different. They said, well, is it just going to be you telling the story? What do you mean? You're going to reenact some things? You're going to have actors? No, I'm going to do all the voices. Well, what about a female voice for the female roles? I said, no, we don't need that. That introduces actors. It's either all one thing or it's not. Yeah. And they didn't know to the moment they first published Inside Cycle, they did not know if it would work. Mm-hmm. And based on the feedback, it worked. Now, some people took objection to it. Some people didn't get it, didn't like it, didn't jive with it, whatever. You know what? You're not going to please everybody no matter what you do, so you might as well give up trying. Mm-hmm. But if you have a chance to bring a little bit of yourself into this world in a clever, creative, thoughtful, spark-filled, interesting, entertaining, enjoyable way, why not do it?
Yeah. What first brought you into the podcast world?
Well, my background's been in radio. Mm-hmm. So I went from doing the stuff I described in high school and in college, ended up working for the student-run radio station, which at that point was a big deal. That was at Cornell, which was a big... in those days, they didn't even have local television. They didn't have cable was a special thing very few students had in Ithaca, New York. Yeah. They didn't really have it. So you needed a really good antenna to get really crappy TV from Cortland, which was 30 minutes away. So most people, there was no TV watching really, unless you went into the student union or something like that, or some of the student residences had main television. So there was no television. Radio was it. And in terms of local radio in Ithaca, New York, there was almost nothing. There was an AM top 40 station, which was on its way to dying. And then there were a couple of, student-run FM stations, one from Ithaca College and one from Cornell. And the one at Cornell was commercial. So they had an interest in doing things a lot of people wanted to hear. So I started volunteering there. I ended up in the news department there. We did, real stuff there. Got to meet some interesting people, work with some interesting people. One of the guys who was an alumnus of Cornell at that time and used to come back to hit on co-eds and go behind the mic to do the sports was a guy named Keith Olbermann, which your listeners in the U.S. will will recognize that name. He's a huge figure in the U.S. from ESPN. So Keith used to come back and read the sport. I remember one time I was doing the news, and I remember I would say, and here's Keith Olbermann with the sports, and all of a sudden there's the voice of God. That was, Keith has the voice of God. So that was the moment where I knew that, a life behind the microphone was not likely to be mine in a radio world. But that was the introduction. Then I went on to business school. And then after that, I went looking for people who worked with broadcasters. And I ended up doing audience research and marketing strategy for broadcasters, radio broadcasters. And I spent years doing that. And it was that experience which cemented in me the knowledge that the way most commercial broadcasters view radio is wholly insufficient to the power of the medium. That, doing montages and sound beds and, it's just, they weren't using the medium to its full effect. And the fullest effect you can use the medium is to scare people. So if you go back to the old radio shows, the Lights Out, that Arch Obler stuff from back in the day, if you haven't done it, you should revisit some old Arch Obler audio. And I wouldn't say that it holds up. I would say that it was ahead of its time. Because you get a sense that people were trying to scare folks using audio then and use audio in ways that were more magical and progressive then than they have since. And I knew that from working in radio. I knew that people weren't using it. And I would go to my friend Jeff Schmidt and say, Jeff, people aren't using the medium of audio to move people, to scare people, to delight people, to thrill people. They're not using it the way it could be used. How can we change this? And the truth is there was no way until this thing called podcasting. And then what was the first kind of, run of podcasts? Well, it was stuff that was repurposed or inspired by public radio in the U.S. Well, public radio is great, but public radio was relatively narrow in terms of its menu of options. It was all very smart, and it tended to be very newsy. So I like to say, I did a presentation with some public radio guys once, and I drew a matrix, a vertical and horizontal. And top of the vertical and bottom of the vertical, I put smart and dumb, okay? Top and bottom, smart, top, dumb, bottom. Left and right, I put entertainment, news. And I said, okay, smart news, I know where that is. That's public radio. Dumb news, okay, we'll call that commercial radio. Dumb entertainment, we'll call that commercial radio. I said, where's smart entertainment? Where's that? I said, well, I don't hear that on public radio. I hear Wait, Don't Tell Me, which is a game show. I hear, a small smattering of shows designed to be entertaining for their own benefit, but not much. There's really no smart entertainment at all at that time. And what podcasting enabled was it enabled people to create entertainment content. Not just news content, not just repurposing content, but both smart and dumb entertainment content. And that's where shows like Lore came from, Lore is smart entertainment. There's a lot in that category now. Inside was designed to be in that category, smart entertainment. That's what got me into it. And that's what, in fact, the opening pitch to Wondery, when I walked into Wondery 4 years ago, they had like half a dozen people working for them in their office on Sunset. And they had a whiteboard with all their shows, and their shows fit in the upper left-hand corner of the whiteboard.
Wow.
There was almost nothing there.
Wow.
And I said, look, I get these shows that are out here in public radio space. Serial is wonderful, but, people forget about Serial. People get obsessed about Serial introducing a new phase for podcasts. But, the first episode of Serial ran on commercial radio, on public radio. the first episode of Serial was slotted into what would have been an episode of This American Life, which produced the show. So they basically used it as a bait and switch. They took it's like the lead into, it's like having the Super Bowl as your lead in.
Yeah.
That's what it was. I mean, This American Life is one of the hugest radio shows in America. And here they took hundreds of radio stations at once, an hour of their time, and dropped the first episode of Serial, and then said, you want to hear more? Go online. Mm-hmm. Well, Discovery is the greatest challenge any show has, and here they solved that problem on the first airing. So obviously it's going to be a phenomenon from there, assuming it's as good as it starts out as, which it was. So my point to the guys at Wondery was, the world doesn't begin and end with Serial. Not everything needs to be news. I said, what about content for the rest of us? What about something about a movie we all know, a TV show we all know, providing some new aspect of it, maybe giving some context, creating my pitch was, let's make a movie out of the making of this movie. Mm-hmm. And that's what we wanted to do. It's not really a biopic as much as it is a movie about the making of the movie. That was the intention. So there are aspects in it, as I indicated, that aren't all purely true, but they all reflect a larger truth. Mm-hmm. This is the thing. Whenever you watch a movie that's based on a true story, they're balancing the need to tell something that really happened with the equally important need to dramatize it in such a way as it works, as it makes sense. Mm-hmm. Why make it into a movie if you're just going to do a documentary? Make it a documentary. I didn't want to do a documentary. I wanted to do a movie about the making of Psycho, which had built into it some backstory about Ed Gein, which was the inspiration. And why did I want to do the Ed Gein story? Because I knew we could make it scary.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny when you say that. I mean, you've done Psycho, The Exorcist, Jaws. I'll use Jaws as an example. That's a movie that scared me from such a young age, and I felt like over the years I had, I guess in a way, seen every angle you could possibly see Jaws, and mm-hmm. I felt like I guess in a way like a connoisseur of, everything to do with that world, and to listen to those episodes and kind of feel like going into it, maybe being like, kind of thinking, I know everything there is to know. It's not going to be a new experience for me, but I'm going to listen because I enjoy Jaws. I enjoy the backstory and everything to do with that era. And then to be completely blown away and come out of it kind of going, now I can think of 100 other movies that I want this exact same experience for again.
Yeah, and that was certainly the intention. I mean, I know on the one hand, well, I've seen Jaws. I know, it goes both ways. Either I've seen Jaws, I know all about Jaws. Why do I need to listen inside Jaws? It could also go, you know what? I've never seen Jaws. And yes, there are people like that. So why in the world would I listen to this? And, I haven't read The Handmaid's Tale, but I've watched the show. Mm-hmm. That's one of the biggest challenges that I had and still have, frankly, is explaining to people what the heck it is. Because people go to it and they expect, what they really expect when they go to something called Inside Jaws? They expect it to be a DVD making of featurette.
Yes.
With audio from Roy Scheider and Steven Spielberg and, Carl Gottlieb and the whole crew. And I could have made that if I wanted to, but why in the world would I want to make that? They did that for Halloween. Mm-hmm. The Ringer did that for Halloween, and I'm sure they did a great job of it. But it was documentaries like that are disposable. They're forgettable. They don't make a lasting impact on you. Mm-hmm. You watch it, you get, you see Ridley Scott comment about Alien for the umpteenth time. What have you gained? Yeah. He hasn't said those same things 100 times over the past 40 years. Really?
Yeah.
Spielberg hasn't said everything there is to say about Jaws over the years, but there's never been any way to integrate kind of the Jaws experience in the context of where Spielberg was at that time in his life. Mm-hmm. And also paint the picture of where he goes from there and why coming to terms with who he was so important in that evolution. I was able to tell a story much larger than the story of Jaws, but I was able to tell it in the context of Jaws. And that is what a movie is. That is what a TV show is. That's why those things are worthwhile.
And I guess that kind of ties into a question that somebody had wanted me to ask, which I guess revolves around creating content for podcasts. You know, like you said earlier, I think podcasts have doubled in the last 12 months, and it seems like everybody wants to start a podcast. And while I guess a lot of people will understand, you know, maybe they're not going to be Joe Rogan status or whatever as regards numbers, is that the key to making or creating a good podcast? Just not to be... See, I think the trap that people fall into is, you know, they see a making of documentary, they listen to a director's commentary, and then try and just replicate that exactly in a way. And like you said, it just becomes very forgettable. It doesn't offer anything
you know,
new.
there's a million breakfast shows in your country. There's a million morning shows in mine. And, you know, anyone outside of their home market has no idea who they are.
Yeah.
Because it's a gang of people coming together talking every day about the news and the weather and what's going on around town or whatever it is. A lot of them aren't that good. They've just been hired for that position, so they're known by the people who listen to them. And those people keep coming back and back and back because of habit, because of the music, because of the brand, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But the idea that, you know, you can open a mic and create a hit is a myth. Joe Rogan's been doing it for like, 20 years, 15 years, something like that. Yeah. Not that doing it for a long time is the solution to the problem. It's much more than that. But the vast majority of shows are never going to have any sizable number of people listening to them. And now that's more true than ever, because it is the single most important thing for any show is to get exposed, is to get seen or heard, discovered. And there's no good solution to that. The best solution is that everyone tells everybody else to listen to something. The reason why you haven't heard any new version of Inside in the past year is because it was very successful for Wondery. I mean, it had millions of downloads. But Wondery right now, owned as it is by Amazon, needs things with tens of millions of downloads.
Yeah.
So they can't justify really at any expense creating another chapter of Inside, because they know what the ceiling is for that. And the ceiling is in the, you know, single millions of downloads per, you know, multiple, not single, but, you know, less than 10 million downloads per episode. That's what it's going to get. Now, you may look at that number and say, wow, that's a lot. But Wondery's trying to get IP established and sold to, you know, NBC Universal, so that they'll do season 2 of Dirty John, which I believe comes to Peacock in another week or so. So that's the game right now, is to create IP that is so intellectual property that's so massive that it is easily monetized. Obviously, for them to invest to create 10 massive hits versus, you know, 10 massive hits plus 10 moderate hits, it's worth their time to just focus on the massive hits, right? This is why Disney makes only Star Wars and Pixar and Marvel movies, right?
Yeah, it makes sense.
So unfortunately, that's the direction the market's moving. It's everything moves in that direction. You know, we get more songs from the biggest, from Taylor Swift. And we say, well, where's all the new country music? And the answer is it's out there, but it's not getting Taylor Swift-sized attention. The movies are out there, but they're indies. Nomadland may win an Oscar, but nobody's going to see it.
Mm-hmm.
But at least it's cheap to make. Podcasts may be great, but being great doesn't mean you're going to be popular. And being popular doesn't mean you're going to be great, by the way.
Yeah.
So the best way to launch a podcast now is to have a popular feed that you can launch it on. This is why, Aaron Mahnke and the guys at Lore are able to launch multiple successful podcasts. It's because he has this ravenous audience who's been subscribed to Lore for years now, who's open to anything new that he does. Mm-hmm. Well, that's why Shonda Rhimes gets to do TV, new TV deal with Netflix. That's why the Duplass brothers have a podcasting deal now with whoever it is, I think iHeart. It's all that. It's why I'm producing a show that is finally, after about 2 years in the making, finally going to be published this summer with iHeart. That I didn't write it, I just co-produced it. But it's a full cast drama, thriller really, called Aftershock. That's 10 episodes, and it stars Sarah Wayne Callies from The Walking Dead. She also wrote and directed it.
Wow.
Jeffrey Dean Morgan, David Harbour from Stranger Things, Tova Feldscher from The Walking Dead, Austin Emilio from Fear the Walking Dead, Tati Gabrielle from, I think, Sabrina on the CW. And I'm only scratching the surface. Michael O'Neill, the amazing Michael O'Neill from Seabiscuit, if you remember that movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's just got an amazing cast of, wonderful professional stars. They're not even professional, they're stars. And why did iHeart buy this project? Well, it's a good project to be sure, but it's because of all those names.
Mm-hmm.
It's because of all those names. So, if you're David Harbour, you can get stuff done that a non-David Harbour can't get done.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess then, what advice would you give to somebody who has, because I know multiple people, I guess, who have moderately successful podcasts, let's say in the hundreds of thousands of downloads per episode, which again, while it's not a Amazon or that kind of level, they do relatively well. Is there a way for somebody to break in?
I did a whole presentation on this for an outfit called Stage 32. I did a whole hour-long thing on this, so I'll only touch on it. First thing is, and this, by the way, is what I remind myself, and you probably remind yourself, is that success is the journey, not the destination.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say moderately successful, that's a destination reference, not a journey reference.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that we're having this conversation is a success for you and for me, I hope. The fact that people are listening to this and getting something out of it is a success for them. The fact that you can have this series that you're doing and do it as your own boss, however many or how few listeners you have, is a success for you.
Yeah.
And we all need to recognize that the gift is our ability to do this stuff, not the degree to which it's celebrated. So it's not about, being famous. It's about sharing your art
mm-hmm.
and doing something worth sharing. And if you're proud of it, then that's what matters most, because there's a lot of people out there who do a lot of art that they're not proud of because it's commercial.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've had conversations with Robert Englund, and Robert, I'm sure if they wanted him to do Freddy, he'd be more than happy to do it. But the truth of the matter is that when you have any conversation with him for any length of time, you realize that this guy is an actor's actor. This guy is not just, a genre hack.
Yeah.
He is not at all a genre hack, in fact. Not only is he a good actor, he is an actor's actor. This guy could talk Shakespeare until you're blue in the face. And that's, to me, more important than being able to talk to the hottest, freshest new face in whatever show or whatever podcast. Everyone has a podcast. It's true. And everyone talks about how huge their podcast is. For one thing, don't talk about how huge your podcast is, because it's never as huge as you say it is, number one.
Yeah.
And who cares, number two?
Yeah.
Who are you trying to, compare against? Stop trying to compare against everything. This is a problem I have. We all have it. But you got to stop trying to compare against other things. It's going to undercut your ability to do the work. Just do the work and make it as good as you can, and do your best to get it in front of as many people as you can, and then accept that that's all right. One of the theme of Inside the Exorcist was, and this is a good way to end, by the way, the theme of Inside the Exorcist was expressed on a hillside in Bel Air, when I had the director and his wife talking to each other on the hill, sipping some champagne, and he was complaining that he hadn't been able to get anything off the ground since The Exorcist. He hadn't been able to. There had been no great success here. Friedkin had French Connection. He had The Exorcist in close proximity, and then everything went off the rails. And he had this kind, he'd just look out on the horizon and kind of bemoan the state of his life, and if anything was going to be different. And I wrote a scene for his wife to tell him, which I had made up. But I actually heard elements of it years ago from some television series, which is now long forgotten. And the scene I wrote was, I had her say, when I was a little girl, I was in school and we had an assignment. The assignment was to carve everybody gets a block of wood and a carving knife, and you have to carve a box. And everyone carves their own box, and then they turned in. And they carved the boxes, whatever they wanted. They turned them into the teacher. The teacher distributed them back, but they distributed different people's boxes to different people. So you didn't get the same box you made back. And I had Sherry say to him that, what she learned from that was that, everyone's box is different. You make that box yourself. But no matter what it looks like, no matter how good it is, no matter how big it is, no matter how fine it is, no matter how lame it is, it's yours. It's yours. Whatever box you make, it's yours. And that's okay. In other words, you've got to accept at a certain point that this is what's yours, and that's enough.
Yeah, I think that's a big lesson for a lot of people. I think a lot of people struggle with that.
I know it. I know it's true.
Yeah, it really is. I have two final questions before I let you go. Kind of quick fire questions. So somebody asked, is there maybe you can't talk about this, but is there a movie or a show you would like to work on? I guess in the same vein as Inside, is there any particular horror movie that you would like to do?
Well, there's a couple of things that what we've tried to do, kind of an always-on version of Inside to develop it. The challenge is that I can't pay for the sound design is very expensive. And, I can't ask people to do that for nothing.
Yeah.
So I can work for free, but I can't have them work for free for my project. So the difficulty has been finding a funding partner. I've actually written 2 4-episode arcs of 2 things. One is Pulp Fiction, and the other is Alien. Wow. And we've actually produced a pilot episode for the Pulp Fiction one, which is fantastic. And the Alien one, like I say, is completely written at this point, and it's got a great theme. It's really terrific. And it's really more about Dan O'Bannon than it is about Ridley Scott. It's terrific, and I would love for people to read it. I would love for people to hear it. Unfortunately, right now, it looks like it's not getting made. that may change as time goes by. We'll see what happens after Aftershock comes out. Maybe, people come out of the woodwork wanting to, pay my production partner to do great work. So that's where we are. So Alien was not only is it one, but it was one because I wrote it. Alien is certainly one. There's other stuff like Blade Runner that would be in that category as well. Texas Chainsaw would be in that category.
Amazing.
Part of me would even like to go back to back to Dracula or Frankenstein for that matter, except not enough is really known about those movies. Boy, I would love to do Freaks. Yeah. But I don't think anybody would listen to it. And not nearly enough is known about it. The Shining. I would love to do The Shining. There is precious little out there about the making of The Shining. There's a documentary by Kubrick's daughter and a long-rumored book that's soon to come out, I'm told, that should have a lot more about the making of the movie, but there's just not enough scholarship out there about it.
Yeah.
So, and I can't get all this, I won't get all this stuff off of internet articles.
Yeah.
So typically I've got like 4 or 5 books spread out in front of me that are all reasonably authoritative and sourced. And I use that as a springboard to weave it all together. When I started writing was Shawshank Redemption. And I haven't finished that one, and unless I know the other 2 can fly, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
But right now I'm trying to reach out to Hollywood trade publications in the hopes that they can see fit to finance a limited series, because limited series is tough. It's tough because people want stuff that's on all the time. So like your show, people don't want 7 episodes and done.
Yeah. That makes sense.
I've got to find if I find the right funding partner, the right distribution partner, maybe I can make it happen and you can hear this stuff. But Pulp is great and Alien is great, and I would love to bring them both to the world.
That would be amazing. Somebody else asked if you could recommend either your favorite podcast or whatever, or one you would recommend people listen to. And do you have a favorite horror movie?
Well, I'll touch on this real quick, but one of the things I really like is the Twilight Zone podcast, the official Twilight Zone podcast. It's just Tom does a great job with it. He's doggedly devoted to it, and the style, again, the stylistic way in which he approaches each episode is just wonderful. And it's good to listen to. I don't have any kind of photographic sense. You can't name an episode title to me and me know what you're talking about. I don't do that. But I can still enjoy and recognize all the episodes he's talking about when I listen to his show. It's terrific. In terms of favorite horror movies, I always like to name the one that surprises people because it's the forgotten Christopher Nolan movie, which is The Prestige.
Oh, wow, yeah.
A lot of people don't consider that a horror movie, but what the heck else is it? Have you not seen the end of the movie? It doesn't get more horrible than that.
That's true. That's a good movie.
He's just clones die every day. I mean, come on. That is the biggest horror ever. And so that, yes, and it is an extraordinarily underrated movie. And I think extraordinarily underseen. At this point, it's like 15 years old.
Yeah, yeah.
But that movie holds up incredibly well, and it is just a wonderful piece of art. And it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's a genre masterpiece. It's every bit The Bride of Frankenstein, in my view.
It is. It's amazing. Well, it's been fantastic to chat with you. I appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, it's my great pleasure, Aaron. This has really been a joy, and thanks for asking all the wonderful questions and allowing me to ramble on and on.
I had the people listening will know there's a much longer list of questions, so maybe we'll get to do this again sometime.
I'm happy to do that at some point in the future. I'll answer any of your questions, and hopefully I'll have other stuff to tell you because we're in the process of, pitching some horror stuff right now, which may come to fruition. And if it does, you'll certainly want to hear about it.
That's I can't wait to hear what that is. Last thing then, I guess, where can people find you, support you, and what to expect?
Well, they can my home site, I guess you'd call it, at markramsey.tv, which is where all the various shows are listed. Plus, that'll probably expose you to a couple of things you haven't heard before. Like we did a great thing with Ed O'Neill called the Undercovers, and we did a great thing. If you're a music fan, of an actor named Reno Wilson as Louis Armstrong, which is, I mean, it's another unique way to do a thing. It's basically a one-man show of Reno as Louis telling his story. And there are some moments in there which are the things I'm proudest of anything I've ever done, that are just so wonderful, that I strongly recommend. And again, you don't need to be a jazz fan to listen. You're just going to enjoy it.
Yeah, well, I found that. I can attest to that for sure. A lot of times when I discover somebody who I enjoy their work, I like to go outside, I guess, the horror world. And that was one I definitely enjoyed.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
So that's how to get in touch. I'm so glad to do this. Thanks for the invite.
Yes, of course, and hopefully later in the year, maybe, or into next year, we'll have you back on and you'll have some more cool stuff.
I hope we've got more to talk about for sure.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Evil wears many masks, but pure horror wears only one. Support First Class Horror on Patreon for as little as $1. Can't get enough of the horror? Carve yourself a deal from official merchandise, only on Teespring. Join us on all social media at First Class Horror. We have such sights to show you.